Hey folks, this is Michael Vega with another episode in the Chug Life podcast. We're going to be talking about a topic that I think is incredibly sensitive to a lot of people, especially in today's America. And we're going to talk about what led to it. We're going to talk about how it was implemented. And we're going to talk about eventually how we see it today in our modern day lives, and in ways that you probably don't expect, and in forms that, if you were told about this back in the day, you might have been prosecuted for it. And of course, we are talking about communism. We are talking about socialism as well. Now, for some of us, these two may seem like one or the other. They may seem to be the same thing in argument cases, and I'm assuming that a lot of people have probably confused one for the other. So let me just make this very simple for the folks that do not understand what communism is, and it's going to be explained to you over and over again in more succinct ways by people that are more familiar with it than I am. And hopefully you'll be able to learn through your own research what these different types of socialism can show up as and what they have been historically. Because it's not, as most people would think, it's not just one size fits all. There is different ways that socialism gets implemented. Small ways, big ways. You could check out, per se, Norway, how they implement their versions of socialism. And you can check out, other European countries that have pursued this. I believe Estonia has versions of it included in their system. And sure, you can say, oh, well, that's a ex-communist state, so it makes sense. No, you got to realize that that's long and gone. And when that was out, when that was not cool, that was it. There was never a semblance of it. There was never any wanting or longing for it. The Soviets completely dropped that ball, okay? And you'll see this time and time again throughout their history. So to really kind of get into what the Soviets are, what the Soviets were, it's important that we recognize what communism is and what socialism is. Communism is an absolute, okay? It affects top to bottom every section of the person, every section of the culture, the lifestyle, the day-to-day life, all of that. In some cases, the original intent is that it empowers the person and the community so much that the state basically ceases to exist. And not basically, it's an absolute, like I said, but that's just my words. That's the idea of communism, is that it is all-encompassing. You are going to cease to have private property. You're going to cease to work through money. There's no bartering system, essentially. Everything is everyone's. That's as far as that goes. It is all-encompassing. And socialism, it's a little bit more murky, in my opinion. It is not murky in a bad way, but there isn't a clear goal, in my opinion. It is to better life, as far as I've come to see of what it can be implemented as. And we're talking about simple things like, and I see simple again, facetiously, okay? You're talking about things like your fire department. You're talking about things like your police department, your post office, those things that benefit everyday life, that are necessary for everyday life, are paid for by the state. And so here is, the comparison. I guess socialism would still see a state be there, because the state would become that kind of like piggy bank. It redirects all of the funds that you can put out through your labor. And so to an extent, I guess, if you're looking at this on a wider basis, it's going to take capitalism away from the private entities and make it specifically for the state. So that way they can fund your life and better your life through your production. And so I guess, like I said, this is an overview on communism specifically, but we're touching a little bit on socialism. But I'm currently more focusing on communism because the episode after this, we're going to continue to speak about communism. And so I kind of want to keep it there until we get to that point and we can introduce what socialism is also in like I said, a more implementative basis on what it looks like on the ground, So where this all starts, right? And you're probably going to be kind of shocked by this, but we're starting in 1861. And in 1861, Russia abolished serfdom. And that put around 23 million people in a whole different lifestyle, a whole different mindset. Their lives were changed dramatically overnight. And you have the implementation of this serfdom, but it becomes a bit more of a slave situation. You're almost kind of like working to stay alive, working to just like pay your debt off, basically. And even then, your debt is still increasing. You're getting paid less now. And so, it got to a situation for the serfs where even after serfdom was abolished, they still found themselves essentially peasants. And so there were some folks that did better than others because they were already in that structure of power, kind of, or they already had a farm set up. They already had wages. We're talking about peasant, absolute bottom of the classes. And so that ends up kind of being the staging ground for where these ideas come off. This is kind of the background to where Engels comes from, to where Karl Marx comes from. This is their understanding, their like current situation is essentially everybody that I can see with my eyes and I have probably ever seen is dirt poor. And the chances of me seeing or knowing or even becoming somebody who is not a peasant, getting out of this class is almost impossible. Let's just put it that way. It is difficult because there is always a pipeline of these poor folks that go to war, because there's always a war. Okay, you got to keep that in mind. On top of just absolutely everything else that is horrible and will probably kill you, there's also the very high likelihood that you get drafted or you get conscripted, is the actual term. Because there was no draft, of course. You're just conscripted. A lot of it's. I would guess it's the same thing if we're being honest here. Very similar, just worse. Worse. Everything for the conscripts. Now, this is the background as well, on top of those guys, for Vladimir Lenin to grow into it. And he's not known as Lenin at that point in his life, but we're going to kind of just make everything more simple for me and for my research's purpose. Simple. We're going to call him Lenin for now and always, of course. Okay. Why is this important? You don't really ever hear of Lenin as like this philosopher kind of, he created Leninism, but let's be honest here, all of these other ideas come off of the original Marxist and the original Engels ideas. So I noticed I said Marxist, but that's we're talking about all the isms that come off of this, I guess now. And there were very different types to all this, and we'll talk about this in our implementation part a lot more in depth. Mostly, I want to stick right now to getting the picture set for you guys of where this comes from and why. And why is it so important to all the other successors to the original idea to have a semblance of the original idea, right? And obviously, you can say that it's just to keep that facade up, or actually, if they do believe the values, they can keep that connection. But I think that in my opinion, there's something more simpler than all of those. And I think it's because they did have ties to each other. Because you'll see, at some point, Lenin meets Marx. He meets Engels. He meets all of these other, and you're going to see at some point, we'll get to them, you'll have moments where he's able to do all the things that he wanted to do. And so he does have like kind of these super, super high. And so I kind of just wanted to make sure we go through the super, super lows. So that way we understand who he is in a better context of what we're going to talk about eventually. So here's the thing that you all got to know about Lenin. Okay. He is not a serf. All right. Serfdom is incredibly it's prevalent. It is in everybody's lips because it's such a huge deal at this point. These guys just got freed. There's a bunch of them. And so that problem isn't a background issue to the major population in Russia. It is a very prevalent issue. And it's almost, you'd say, a hot topic for everybody. But specifically for Lenin, this becomes something that he slowly becomes kind of made aware of in the more brutal sense. It takes him a bit to be able to get to the point where he's a hardcore communist. He's hardcore in the belief that, oh my God, this is atrocious and this is the only way. It takes him a while. But it's so prevalent around him. You just need to keep that in mind. That it's not a driving point originally. This is something that he becomes exposed to things so brutal, and he ends up getting really the bad side of the state's wrath at some points. And you'll see this throughout his whole life. Of course, it becomes a huge backdrop because he has so many connections that the problems with the state become, more just fuel. And so the center of all of this is this egotistical man who is incredibly smart. And it's not the worst combination to have when you're trying to start something new and you need the confidence to be able to pull through with some dog shit ideas and be able to make sense of all of this to people. Now, the big things that happen to Lenin really is, one, he has a bad relationship with his classmates. So he not only ends up becoming this guy who's aware of what bullying people can be, and what having a fear over people can do and how far it can get you. And he utilizes that really well. He ends up, he has a really good relationship with his brother. And his brother is a military man. He is very much a loyal guy to the state until he becomes radicalized. And it's, this may seem like a jump in things, but here's the thing that you got to remember is this was everywhere. Serfs were a huge part in just about everybody's life. And he's somebody who probably has had a lot of firsthand ongoings with serfs within his own house or his friends or anywhere else. So you have him go to St. Petersburg, and he gets into a meeting with something called the People's Will. And this becomes kind of like his life. He goes headlong into this. He's not somebody that needed a lot of prodding, I would assume, because you are this close to the functions of the state. You are seeing firsthand the atrocities, the absolute horrors that you need to be put through to get into power. And he is like, this is gross, dude. Like, we should probably get power back to the people, because I don't think you guys have what it takes to do this. And you want to remember that the czars have been royally fucked. They've just been fucked for years, okay? It's been really bad. People are starving to death. It's not looking good, and it's not getting better. So you have him get in with this group. He starts financing the group. They start getting bigger. They start getting more power. Now it's time to take action. We've got to do something with this. So what do? They assassinate the Tsar. And that's what happens in 1881. And at this point, they tried to also go for the Tsar's son, but failed, and they got caught. So Sasha ends up getting not assassinated. He's put to death, and family was ostracized because of this. It becomes a huge, huge deal. And so through this, Lenin is just having a horrible time, of course. He's lost his brother. He's really close with him. But one of the things that this does most of all is strengthen him. You know, he becomes a lot more mentally strong throughout this. And he finds a guy named Nikolai Chernyshevsky. He's an author, and he just goes into this man's books and ends up kind of figuring out, how am I going to implement the people's will? How am I going to move this forward? Okay, if we did get into power, what are we going to do? And this kind of blossoms the flower of radicalization for Vladimir Lenin. And at this point, he's got an idea of what he wants to do. He's got an idea of how he wants to do it, but still kind of like, I don't really know. You know, I don't know if I want to do this. You know, this we got to figure what's implementation actually going to be like. You know, like, this sounds really great, but what are we going to do? So he makes some visits, goes to factories, he's having conversations with people, and he's explaining these more in depth. And he's kind of, you know, at this point, putting the theory out and getting more feedback. And it's kind of helping him to be able to get this idea moved forward on what implementation would look like. So at this point, it's 1895, all right? And he decides he's going to go on a trip. He's going to go around Europe, and he's going to do this on a more bigger basis. Okay, he wants to go everywhere there is a communist or socialist, and he wants to have these conversations. And keep in mind, sure, communists and socialists, they had bad-ish tints to them at that point, but it was still pretty new. So it's not like there was folks getting just outright exiled yet. Keep that in mind, yet. At this point, it was still fairly healthy. So there were pretty public meets and all of that kind of stuff to where he could kind of link into pretty easily. And he felt ballsy enough to do this, I would assume. So goes to Europe. What's the first thing he's going to do? He's going to meet two very popular idols of him, Plekhanov and Axelrod. Meets his idols, And coolest thing about this for him is that Axelrod was pretty impressed by him. So they make all these kind of headway into what communism and socialism is going to be. What are we going to do with this? How do we implement it? He continues furthering these ideas, and eventually he gets all this material. He gets some propaganda stuff going. He gets all this kind of planning, put it on paper, make it look good. And so he goes, all right, we're going to go back to Russia, and we're going to start our own our own business. We're going to, get going, and we're just going to, we're going to go for it, dude. All right, we're going to put this out in Russia, and we're just going to shit on the government, man. It's going to be great. All right, by next year, we're taking power. Okay, gets a business partner. They do it, and he gets arrested. And guess who snitched on him? Yep, his business partner. His business partner was an agent for the Okhrana and gave him up as soon as they got going. So, ain't that a bitch? So, September of that year, he's exiled. And this is really where he starts going like hardcore. All right. He is just going to full blown. There's nothing to stop him now. All right. Like he's just going to get his books. He's going to get his planning. This is the best thing to ever happen. All right. So we're going to move forward and we're going to get it started. The RSDLP is the first socialist party that was started in Russia. All right. In 1900. So it takes about 5 years from the time Lenin is first exiled till they start a socialist party. Not even communist at this point, okay? And I'm sure people probably put 2 and 2 together, who knows, but it does give you some food for thought here. And so at this point, Lenin served his time. He comes back from his penal colony. He's come back into regular life. It's 1900, all right? And he decides he wants to leave Russia. So he applies to leave Russia. They say yes, of course. So here's the thing that we're going to need to get very, very clear about what happens when he leaves Russia in 1900. It is probably one of the most unstable times in Russia, mostly because you are having a lot of political repression going on. And the Tsar is forever continuing to tighten the grip and kind of tighten the noose on the people, the serfs, all of people who spoke out, they were treated horribly. They were exiled just like Lenin was. And, to most people's shock, Lenin got the better part of his exile because he wasn't just outright sent to Siberia. So there's that. Now, in exile is when he adopts Lenin. And throughout his whole time in exile, he will be hunted. The Okhrana will be keeping an eye on him wherever he goes, whatever he does. They will be up his ass. Okay? Now, so he goes to Germany, starts the Spark, and this is in Munich. And he's writing communist papers. He is, distributing it. He's sending stuff back to Russia. He's sending stuff everywhere. All right. Here is the problem. He is having a lot of internal feuds with him and his buddy about how to actually do communism. How to market it, how to put it on paper. It just kind of didn't really work from the get-go. It was never a perfect marriage between Martov and Lenin. It's, I would say, very similar to a marriage, but they were bickering a lot of the time. And it was just kind of how their personalities were. They had different visions for how to actually implement this. Anyhow, so they always kind of saw it more so on a intellectuals versus proletariat type basis. There was kind of like the original break of what you would have between the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks eventually. And this is really where that break will start to kind of happen. Now, what's really funny about this is that at this point, Lenin decides to reuse a title from Chernyshevsky and his original "What It Is to Be Done" or "What Is to Be Done." Apologies. And so Lenin puts that title out as well, and it's a pretty solid success. Okay, it's not the huge success of his career, of course, but this gets it going. And this is another, of course, kind of just coming off of what Chernyshevsky did, refining his ideas and putting this out en masse, and it works out very well. So, move forward a bit, and it's 1902 at this point. He ends up getting caught by the German secret police, and it's not looking good. Okay, he's got to move to London, and he's really upset because he's got to get everything running again in London. But no matter, shortly after this, he meets Trotsky, and he was just in awe with Trotsky, we could say. Absolutely impressed. It was absolutely incredible happenstance. Well, till Plekhanov decided to move the office of the newspaper to Geneva. And this just absolutely pissed Lenin off. But it really doesn't matter because I think that eventually Lenin saw how this could kind of work better. But like I said, it wouldn't matter for much longer. So Lenin liked Trotsky. Plekhanov did not. Plekhanov's in Geneva having a grand old time. Lenin is meh. Okay, he doesn't like people that can say no to him. And even though he likes Trotsky, Trotsky doesn't really think much of him. So he's kind of like in a really, shit spot because Martov wants workers in the party. He wants poor people in the party. He wants to make this an everybody type thing, actual for the people. But Lenin kind of wanted to lean more towards rich folks staying. And, he understood that would be a lot easier to be able to make this a financial uprising and to be able to fund it a lot easier. But here's the problem. Eventually, you're going to have this cause a split. And like I said previously, this is where you get the whole kind of split for Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. And we'll speak a bit more on that later. So we're going to move forward to 1905. All right, in 1905, we have the Bloody Sunday Revolution. And this is a huge, huge issue for Nicholas II because he has a really, really horrible rap with the people. It's just not looking good. The last year, he saw huge defeats to the Japanese. He lost a lot of people, and it's not looking good. All right, it's just anti-war sentiment as a whole is sky high, but anti-czarist sentiment is also just absolutely sky high. So people are pissed off, protesting. All right, it is just insane. All right, they have been going at it for a couple of months, and it's just not getting better. So the Tsar starts doing crackdowns. All right, he starts getting people arrested, starts getting people shot, starts shooting on crowds, the whole lot. It becomes a whole civil war, essentially. Now, at this point, Lenin is in Germany, and he's kind of freaking the fuck out. He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how he's going to do this. He is really just kind of in a not good spot in life, because now is the time and he is not there. So how is this going to work? Well, this is really where it gets juicy, in my opinion, because not only do you have the Russian government fucking shit up, you have the people fucking shit up, and Lenin wants in on this. All right, he really does want to get this going, and he thinks this is the best time to do it. Well, the Tsar decides he wants to back down. He's going to make reforms. We're going to establish the Duma. We're going to really try and come to terms with what the people want. Okay? It's not looking good. It's really just kind of like a big old problem now, because while you can make, you can concede stuff and you can make commitments to do certain things, it's not going to be what the people want if you don't do all of it. And it's just going to lead to a lot more division, and eventually it doesn't work. So, 1905, Stalin and Lenin meet. Stalin was incredibly disappointed in Lenin. He was not very much impressed with who this man was. He didn't really match up to what Stalin had read from Lenin's work. And he also gotta realize Stalin was a piece of shit. And he was a thief, a robber, a gang leader. And Lenin needed money. So it didn't really matter. Stalin wanted power. Lenin needed money. Match made in heaven. And he really just kind of realized at this point, this is really the height of Lenin's thinking and implementation. He's put out several works. He's toured Europe, talking with people, talking with other communists on how to implement this, how does this work, all of this planning. And he's kind of got his squad assembled at this point. He's ready to do this. Now, the one thing he needs is a war to really get this going, okay? It is not looking good for Russia. It is not looking good for most of Europe. It's a really bad time right now in Europe. And anyhow, it's 1917 at this point. And scarcity is sky high for food. Rationing is a thing. It is really horrible. There's people dying everywhere. And people need bread. There's bread lines everywhere. There's protests for food every day, every hour of the day pretty much. And eventually these break into huge protests of violence in Moscow proper. And the Tsar is absolutely just shocked. He has no idea how to deal with this. He thought everything was going better, blah, 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 blah. So he orders his police to shoot protesters. And police say fuck no and join them. Well, the Tsar has no option but to abdicate at this point. And ladies and gentlemen, the rest is history. The rest, we know. The rest and the remaining 80 years from this moment will be the Soviet Union. And this leads to a massive power vacuum that the Red Army and the communists walk into, and eventually will lead to a civil war between the Red Army and the White Army. Eventually, the Red Army will win. The Soviet will become a thing. The Comintern will come into power. All of these aspects of government that was known will cease to exist. The Soviets will change Russia. In some ways, they will revolutionize the world. In the next episode, we will be talking about how they revolutionize the world. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Chug Life podcast. I just want to give you guys a couple of words. Just kind of speak from my heart. This is always a blast. And this is one of the few things in life that I enjoy from the depths of my heart. To be able to just speak my mind, speak what I want, and talk about what I want. And I just hope that I can do this for a while. It's fun. Anyhow, I really appreciate you guys. If you check this out, you are awesome. And thank you very much. And make sure to tune in for our next episode, which will be out here in a couple of days. Sorry for the wait, but as you know, we are currently on roughly a month or so on next episodes. This week we will be doing a few episodes for the week, but for the most part, I'm working on a month max. And that is just, life is hectic, and I'm just trying to enjoy it for right now. But at some point, we will get back to dropping one every week. That is the goal. But right now, just going to leave it as is. Anyhow, stay tuned for the next episode, y'all. Thank you for checking it out. You guys have a great one.